My name is Amelia. I was 25 when I met him. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had just finished work and stepped into a little cafe near the library. The windows were foggy. The air smelled like coffee and cinnamon. I sat by the window reading a book, and then he walked in. His name was Ethan. He ordered tea, smiled at the barista, and looked around for a seat. There were none except the chair in front of me. He walked over and asked gently, "Mind if I sit here?" I smiled and nodded. That small moment started something big. We talked for an hour about music, books, and travel dreams. His eyes were soft, his voice was warm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I didn't know then that this was the beginning of a love that would one day break me. After that first meeting, we started talking every day, a message in the morning, a phone call at night. He made me laugh. He remembered the small things I said, like how I loved rain, or how I always burnt my toast. One evening, we walked in Queen Square. The leaves were golden. I was cold, so he gave me his coat. I looked up at him, and he smiled, that quiet, gentle smile I had started to wait for. I began writing his name in my notebook, not as a habit, but as a hope. When he held my hand, it felt like the world slowed down. No one had ever looked at me that way before, not rushed, not too fast, just real. And slowly, I started falling in love. I didn't know then that love, even when it starts gently, can still carry pain. It was almost a year after we met. Ethan asked me to take a walk with him in the rain. I laughed. He always knew I loved the rain. The street was empty, just the soft sound of water hitting the pavement. He didn't speak much that evening, just held my hand. Then, under a street lamp, he stopped. He took out a small box from his coat pocket and knelt down. My heart stopped. The world was quiet, only the rain and his voice. "Amelia, I don't want to live another day without you. Will you marry me?" I covered my mouth, tears mixing with the rain. I whispered, "Yes," again and again. He stood up, kissed my forehead, and we stood there holding each other, soaked but happy. That night, I went to bed smiling. I believed I had found forever. But I didn't know forever could still hurt. The day of the wedding was soft and quiet, light clouds in the sky, birds singing gently in the trees. I wore my mother's wedding dress. It was old but beautiful. I stood in front of the mirror, hands shaking, heart full. My best friend tied a small ribbon in my hair. "You look like a poem," she whispered. The small church was filled with people we loved. Ethan waited at the end of the aisle, eyes shining. When I walked towards him, I saw everything I had dreamed of: a husband, a future, a love story. We said our vows with tears in our eyes. His hands trembled as he held mine. "I promise to love you," he said, "every day of my life." When we kissed, people clapped, and I felt warm inside. That night, we danced under fairy lights. I laid my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, thinking, this is the start of something beautiful. And it was, but beauty doesn't always last forever. A week after the wedding, we moved into a small flat together. It was on the top floor. The stairs were old, the windows creaked, but it was ours. We unpacked boxes slowly, laughed when we couldn't find the kettle. I placed flowers on the kitchen shelf. He hung up a wedding photo in the hall. In those first days, we stayed up late watching movies, ate dinner on the floor, burnt toast, shared blankets, and kisses in the morning. I loved those quiet moments. I felt safe. Sometimes we'd go to the market on Saturdays, hold hands, pick out fruit, talk about how we'd paint the living room someday. I believed this was what love looked like. Simple, warm, real. But slowly, small things began to change, and I didn't notice. Not yet. It started with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that makes you feel alone even when someone is sitting right next to you. Ethan stopped talking as much. He came home tired, eyes low, voice short. I asked, "Is everything okay?" He would nod, but never explain. We used to cook together. Now he just ate quickly and stared at his phone. When I told him about my day, he didn't smile like he used to. Sometimes he didn't even listen. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Marriage is hard, right? People get busy. But in my heart, I felt something changing, something missing. One night, I went to bed before him. I turned off the light, lay in the dark, and whispered, "Please, don't stop loving me." But the room stayed quiet, and so did he. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us grew. We still lived in the same flat, but it felt like we were strangers. In the morning, he left without saying goodbye. At night, he came home and sat in silence. We didn't argue. That almost felt worse. There was no shouting, no slamming doors, just the quiet sound of two people falling apart. I tried to bring us back, cooked his favorite meal, wore the dress he once said he loved, wrote him a small note. "I miss you, even when you're here." He smiled, said thank you, but nothing changed. I stopped hearing "I love you." I stopped feeling seen. I looked in the mirror one evening and whispered, "Where did I go?" Because somewhere in trying to keep him close, I was slowly losing myself. We were invited to dinner at his sister's house. The table was full. Roasted chicken, glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the walls. Everyone looked so happy. Ethan sat beside me, smiling at stories, nodding at jokes. His hand rested near mine, but never reached for it. His sister asked, "So, how's married life, Amelia?" I forced a smile. "It's good," I said. "We're happy." I felt the words crumble inside my mouth. I looked at him, hoping he'd squeeze my hand, say something silly, show he was still mine. But he just looked at his plate. That night, driving home, We didn't speak. The silence between us was louder than ever, and I realized I was pretending to be the happy wife, pretending we were still in love. But in truth, I was already alone, even with him right there. The rain had been falling since morning. It matched how I felt inside. I stood by the window, holding a cup of tea, watching water run down the glass. Behind me, Ethan sat on the sofa, staring at his laptop. I wanted to say something. Do you still love me? Do you miss us? But no words came. I was tired of begging for attention, tired of hoping. That afternoon, I went into the bedroom and shut the door quietly. I sat on the floor and cried. Not loudly, not with anger, just soft, tired tears, the kind that come when your heart breaks and no one even notices. I looked around the room, the bed we once laughed in, the bookshelf we built together, the frame with our wedding photo, now dusty. Everything was here, but the love, it was gone. And maybe I was starting to realize that I needed air. I needed space. That weekend, I walked into town alone. No plans, no messages, just me. I wandered into a small bookshop. The smell of old pages wrapped around me like an old friend. I used to come here before marriage, before Ethan. I used to spend hours here, reading poetry, sipping tea, dreaming of writing my own story one day. I ran my fingers along the shelves, picked out a book I hadn't read in years, sat by the window, and for a moment, just a small, quiet moment, I felt like myself again, the girl who smiled for no reason, who wrote her feelings down, who believed in love but never begged for it. I took a deep breath and held onto that feeling, because somewhere, buried under all the pain, I was still there and I wanted her back. I messaged Claire, my best friend since university. We hadn't spoken properly in months. I had pulled away without even realizing. She replied in seconds, "Meet me at our old cafe?" I said yes. When I walked in, she stood up and hugged me tightly. No questions, just warmth. We sat by the window and I told her everything. Not in big, dramatic words, just the quiet truth about the distance, the silence, how I couldn't recognize myself anymore. She listened, really listened. Then she said something I still hear in my head. You can love someone and still lose yourself, but you don't have to stay lost. I looked at her and I started to cry because I realized she saw me, and maybe it was time I started seeing myself too. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Ethan lay next to me, breathing softly, peaceful, but I felt like I was a world away. I thought about Claire's words, "You don't have to stay lost." And I asked myself, what if this is all there ever is? What if I keep shrinking to make him comfortable, keep fading so the marriage can survive? I looked around the room. It was filled with memories, wedding photos, weekend getaways, the blanket we bought together in Cornwall. But none of it felt like me anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't dramatic, just quietly sad. I sat up slowly, reached for my notebook in the drawer, and started to write. I didn't write about Ethan. I wrote about me, about the girl I used to be, and the woman I wanted to become. And with every word, I felt a tiny piece of myself come back to life. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The next morning, I didn't wait. I tied my hair up, put on a light coat, and walked into town with no plan, just a purpose. I stopped outside a small notice board near the community center. Handwritten posters, painting classes, writing groups, a book club on Sundays. My fingers hovered over a flyer, creative journaling for women who want to reconnect with themselves. I smiled, small, hesitant, but real. Without overthinking, I took the number and sent a message. "Hi, I'd like to join." It was the first thing I had done in months that was just for me. I didn't tell Ethan, not because it was a secret, but because it was sacred. A part of me, just mine. That afternoon, I bought a new notebook, one with a soft green cover, like the color of peace. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt present, whole. It was only one small step, but it was the beginning of finding me again. That evening, Ethan came home early. He placed his briefcase down, loosened his tie, and kissed my cheek like always. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. We sat down for dinner. I had made pasta. It was his favorite, but neither of us touched it. The clinking of cutlery absent, only silence. He looked at me for a long second. "You're different lately," he said. I nodded. "I know." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Because deep down, he felt the distance too. I used to fill every silence, explain myself, beg for closeness. But this time I just sat there, calm, still. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out who I was becoming. And in that silence, for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt strong. Not because I had power over him, but because I had finally found a little bit of power within myself. I woke up early. The light through the curtains was soft, golden. Ethan was still asleep, turned away from me. I sat up slowly, legs folded beneath me, notebook resting on my lap. I wrote a single sentence. I am not sorry for growing. For months, I had tiptoed through my own home, trying not to upset him, not to speak too loud, not to shine too bright. I had said sorry for everything, for being tired, for asking questions, for needing more. But that morning, I didn't apologize for waking up before him. I didn't apologize for making tea and playing soft music in the kitchen. I didn't apologize for existing, fully, gently, but without shrinking. I sat by the window, notebook in hand, and realized something quietly beautiful. Healing doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with a slow, steady reclaiming of your own breath. And that day, for the first time in a long time, I breathed like I belonged to myself again. That night, I wrote him a letter, not to give, but to understand myself. I sat by the small wooden desk in our room, the candle flickering gently. And in the soft silence, my heart poured out through the pen. Dear Ethan, I married you because I loved you, not for the house or the rings or the name, but because I thought we'd grow together. I paused, tears welled in my eyes, not from anger, but from the quiet grief of feeling unseen. I stopped dancing around the kitchen, stopped wearing yellow, stopped writing poems in the morning sun. I shrank so your voice would feel louder. I dimmed so your light could shine. I wiped my tears slowly, then continued. But I can't keep disappearing, not to prove I'm loyal, not to make love work. If love means losing myself, then maybe it's not love at all. I signed it without a name because the woman who wrote it was someone new, someone who was finally learning to be her own home. I folded the letter, slipped it into my journal, and whispered softly to myself, "You are enough, even if no one else says it." That rain slight, the rain had been falling for hours. The living room was dim, just the soft glow of the table lamp and the sound of drops dancing on glass. I sat curled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, notebook resting beside me. Ethan came in, no phone in hand, no rush in his steps. He looked at me like I was a stranger, or maybe someone he'd forgotten to really see. "You've changed," he said quietly. I looked at him and nodded. "I have." He stood there a while, like he didn't know what to do with my stillness. "You're not angry," he said. "No," I replied, "just tired." He walked closer, slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a memory they're afraid to disturb. "Is there still love here?" The question floated between us, heavy, uncertain. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because, for the first time, I realized love wasn't the only thing I needed. I needed to feel alive. I needed to feel free. And in that moment, I think he finally understood not what he had done, but what I had become without him even noticing. I stood in our bedroom, staring at the open suitcase on the bed. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no slamming of doors, just quiet. A soft kind of courage that comes when you've cried enough to feel clear. I folded a jumper, then a pair of jeans, not everything, just enough. Enough to say, I'm not running away, I'm walking toward myself. I glanced around the room, the mirror we bought together, the photo frame he never changed, the candles I always lit when I felt alone. For years I thought love meant staying, but now I saw it clearly. Love should never mean losing your own voice just to keep someone else comfortable. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I didn't feel afraid. I felt whole, not because I had all the answers, but because I finally asked the right question. What about me? I picked up my bag, took one last look at the life I tried to make work, and whispered under my breath, "This is not the end. This is the beginning of me." The air smelled like rain and leaves. I sat on a bench under a wide oak, coat wrapped tightly around me, watching the wind carry golden leaves across the grass. It had been a week since I left, 7 days of unfamiliar beds, lukewarm coffee, and silence, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. At first, I kept reaching for my phone, waiting for a message, but each time I stopped myself and asked, what would it change? Healing didn't arrive with a grand feeling. It came in quiet moments, in the way I breathed deeper, walked slower, noticed the world again. I watched a child in red boots splash through puddles, her mother laughing behind her. I smiled, really smiled. I pulled out my notebook, the one I used to hide in drawers, and I began to write again, not about him, but about me, what I loved, what I missed, what I wanted. Each sentence felt like stitching a torn piece of fabric back into something whole. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. I felt like the author. The morning sun poured through the glass, casting golden shapes across the floor. A new flat, small, simple, but mine. The walls were still bare, the shelves half empty, but there was peace in the quiet. I stood by the window, holding a cup of tea, watching people pass below. No one knew my story here. No one saw the broken girl I had been, and that felt beautiful. I wasn't healing to win someone back. I was healing to come back to myself. I started doing things I had forgotten I loved. Reading, drawing, talking, long walks without looking at the time. I met new people, slowly, gently, not to replace him, but to remind myself I could still connect, still laugh, still begin again. And one morning, I looked in the mirror and whispered, "You're not perfect, but you're whole." I no longer needed validation from someone who only gave me half a heart. I wanted more, and now I knew I deserved it. So if anyone asked me, "Do you still love him?" I'd smile and say, "Maybe I do, but I love myself more." And that's how this story ends. Not with a perfect romance, but with a woman who finally chose herself.